Okay, I did a lesson on this last week. A student in Loudoun County named Carlos C. started a change.org petition, and I read it. I forget where I found out about it. I think it was from my English teacher group text. And I read it and thought it would be a very handy and relevant rhetorical analysis opportunity. So we used it as sort of a warm-up discussion slash skills review, and I'm going to share that discussion with you as well. So when we did the activity, the petition had like 6,500 signatures. It has ballooned up to 14,000 signatures. Carlos Z, I've learned a little bit more about him, and I have my own opinions about the success of the paragraph that he writes for this petition. But let's go into this assuming that he is, in fact, successful in his rhetorical purpose. And honestly, I do think, I'm not sure, I think anybody really could have made this petition and been successful because it wasn't a very tough ask to get people to sign this. He didn't have a very hard job to convince people that the workload is too difficult this fall. At the time that he created this, it was about 4 or 5 weeks into online learning, and everybody was starting to realize that this is the rate we were going, and the stress that most high schoolers were putting on themselves was untenable. Okay, so with that said, though, let's first read what he wrote. It's only like, what, 6 sentences, 7 sentences? And this is, I'll put the link to the petition in the description, but I have a screenshot in the presentation, which I'm also going to link in the description. He says, all right, Carlos Z writes, I have begun to believe since online school started, our teachers have assigned us too many assignments to the point I've been getting sleepless nights and have been learning to submit assignments before 11:59 p.m. instead of actually learning the material. I've been an A student my entire life and have never been this exhausted, an all A student, excuse me, my entire life, and have never been this exhausted and stressed over school. I don't even have time for after school activities or even going outside. I feel like if we bring enough attention to this petition, we can actually get a chance in the amount of work we have to do. I feel bad for anyone that has a part-time job while having to deal with online school. Thank you for reading this and have a great rest of your day. So wait, how many sentences is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I guess you could probably debate as to the rhetorical value of that final sentence. Wishing somebody to have a good rest of your day is, well, yeah, I'd say the first 5 are very rhetorical in nature. Let's establish the rhetorical situation. If you want to practice your skills, and if you haven't done this, if you're not one of my students who hasn't participated in this activity, maybe take a moment to pause this video, look at this petition, and try to establish the rhetorical situation, meaning the space, the SPACE components of Space Cat. All right, maybe pause the video right now and then start it, because the next slide is going to go over those very components. Which is this. So our speaker is Carlos Z. He's a Loudoun County high school student. Now here's the problem. He does not specify that he is a high school student. He clarifies that later on in like responses to the petition. He leaves so many opportunities on the table. I had a student who said she knew him or followed him on TikTok or Snapchat or something and said he was a freshman. In my opinion, it would have strengthened his argument so much more with much more specificity about really everything he talks about in it. But again, let's work with what we got here. We know he is a student in Loudoun County, and you can kind of infer that he is a high school student or middle school of some sort. If it would really make it interesting if he was an elementary school student writing about it. But anyway, we know he's a high school student, and that makes him more than just a name. There's value to him being a student, as we're going to see in just a sec. His purpose, I mean, he puts his purpose as the title of the petition: reduce the workload for, he calls it low-co students. I wrote it out, Loudoun County students. His audience. Now, this is where, when I was doing this discussion with my students, we had to get into a little bit of a debate about this, because my students instantly said that his audience is solely his fellow students. And I disagree with that. And if you were analyzing something like, if you were analyzing this, you would be, your analysis would struggle if you were solely identifying his audience as just his fellow students, because how are his fellow students going to reduce the workload for themselves? They're not the people who can control that. And I got into a debate about that. But the people who control the workload are teachers and their bosses, and then their bosses' bosses. So, and ultimately, the people who control the heads at Ashburn at the school board office are the community members, school board members, voters who elect them into office. So the audience is the entire Loudoun County community. And here's the proof. He's choosing to do this on change.org on a public petition. He didn't make, if he just wanted to vent about the stress of school, he would have done it on TikTok or Snapchat or somewhere where only his fellow youths are looking at it. But he chose a public forum to vent this because he wants as many people in Loudoun County to see this as possible. I am inferring this, but I'll bet if I was able to talk with him, he would agree with me on that. Because his purpose is to reduce the workload. And to do that, he has to reach out to more people than just his fellow students. Okay, then we have context and exigence. Context, remember, is just kind of the facts of the matter, like the setting of this text. We're in the fall of 2020. Online learning is taking place. We're in, I could have added Loudoun County, Virginia. Does that matter? You know what? Loudoun County, it does matter because, you know why? Because students take very I'm going to actually add that to the context right now. Loudoun County, VA. Because I was down in Central Virginia recently, back at home, and I did not sense that students at those schools were nearly as stressed by online learning as Loudoun County students. And it's because, frankly, Loudoun County students who are ambitious and a lot of times come from ambitious families with very high expectations for college and career success. So they put a lot of stress on themselves by taking these workloads that even under the best of circumstances are extremely stressful. And thus, when you put them in bad circumstances like this, it really gets nasty. So yes, the context of it being in Loudoun County is important. And then the exigence is, after 4 weeks of this online learning, students are just feeling the insane pressure of doing all their classes online, the stress of only seeing their teachers twice a week for 1 hour each day, and all the stress that comes with the outside problems of whatever your circumstances are at home, all pushing toward Carlos finally needing to reach out to the powers that be to try to get the workload reduced. So what choices does he make in this, in these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in these 6 sentences in order to achieve his purpose? So if you watched, not my previous video, but the video before that, I talked about ways to identify rhetorical choices. I talked about those strong verbs. So again, if you haven't participated in this activity in my class, pause right now on this slide and look at these 6 sentences and try to assign strong verbs to begin describing what he's doing with each of these sentences. And I gave the same description for those first 3 sentences. I think he's doing the same thing in those. You could maybe argue that he's doing something slightly different there. But I think the first 3, he has one choice going on. And then he changes right here, and then he changes again right here. All right, so we've taken a chance to brainstorm about what choices he makes. All right, and here's what I put. For the first 3 sentences, he describes the stress online learning has caused in his life. Is that important to achieve his purpose? Yeah, it's important because he's got to convince the powers that be to weaken the workload. So he starts off by using that evidence that he has, which is his own life, anecdotal experience. And I'm going to analyze that in just a sec. He then calls his peers to action. I feel like if we bring enough attention to this petition, we can actually get a chance. I mean, I think he means change in the amount of work we have to do. I would bet money he wrote this on a phone. Maybe not. I don't know why I'm so sure of that. He then empathizes with his fellow peers. I feel bad for anyone who has a part-time job while having to deal with online school. That's a very shrewd, clever choice by him to expand kind of the range of evidence and cast people's attention not just on himself and his own problems, but also expand it to other possibly less fortunate, less privileged students, right? And I know, again, I know nothing about Carlos C, but I think that was very smart of him to bring that up and not just make it about, oh, woe is me. He brings up other people as well. And then he says, thank you for reading this. Have a great rest of your day. And I didn't bother trying to assign a strong verb to that. Flatters his audience, maybe. You've got 3 right here. Even with just these 5 sentences, you could write a 5-paragraph essay. I'm just kind of throwing this together one evening in the middle of October. So I'm not going to write an entire essay. I am going to write the first 2 paragraphs, though. Here's what an intro would look like. And remember, in the intro, we want to establish that rhetorical situation and have our thesis at the end. That's how I like to do it. I actually read an essay for one of my classes today that put the thesis at the very beginning, and it was fine, but I recommend putting it at the end. Like so, in the fall of 2020, Loudoun County high schools, like many across the United States, began the year virtually. This unprecedented response to the dangers of COVID-19 resulted in long hours spent in front of the computer by students and teachers alike. After a month of this, the response by many students at the high school level was that the workload was far too great. Oh my goodness. Well, gee whiz, Thomas, look at you. Let me put the extra O there. Sorry. Unsubscribe. Downvote. One student named Carlos started a Change.org petition with the intent of lessening the workload on Loudoun County students. Carlos wrote an introduction to his petition encouraging people to support his view that the workload of online learning was too great. So I very carefully made sure that it was clear that I identified what his purpose was. His purpose of that paragraph of text is to encourage people to support his view that the workload of online learning is too great. To accomplish his purpose, he describes the stress of online learning, the stress online learning has caused in his life, calls his peers to action, and empathizes with his fellow peers. So I took those choices from the prior breakdown, and I just tuck them in my thesis right there. Okay? So let me show you what one body paragraph would look like modeling this. And so we begin, and I'm going to do it in chronological order. There's only 5 sentences, but I'm starting with those first 3. Carlos begins with his most valuable evidence, which is his own experience. The first 3 sentences recount how his life has now been reduced to, quote, sleepless nights and submitting work instead of, quote, actually learning the material, end quote. Notice I didn't quote the entire sentence, any of the entire sentences. I just picked a few choice phrases from it because I want to now get to the analysis. By recounting his own stress, Carlos establishes his authority on the matter and appeals to the pity of his audience of Loudoun County residents, none of whom have gone through these unusual circumstances. I'm explaining how it's appealing to the readers. And I'm saying that the audience are residents, and there's none of the boomers who live in Loudoun County have ever lived through a pandemic. They've never done online learning. When they went to school, there was no online anything, right? There was just little telegram wires, right? Okay, so explaining how it appeals to them. He has authority on this. He has experience. So it's a balance of those 2 appeals right now. What's more, Carlos also explains that he's, quote, a former all-A student, end quote. This establishes his authority more on the stress of online learning, since he is no stranger to doing well in school and clearly has succeeded in the past. By sharing his fall from academic excellence, he also appeals to the logic of his audience, implying that if a former all-A student is struggling during these times, surely less scholarly students are struggling as well. And that, again, is just explaining the why. Why does it matter that he mentioned that he is an all-A student? How does it convince people that the workload is too great? Well, if he says it's too great, if he's used to working hard and he's struggling, well, gee, it must be pretty hard. And it must be really hard on the people who aren't all A students, right? And then I synthesize the ideas before I move on. Carlos describes the stress of online learning to win the reader's sympathy and hopefully their support. So I've kind of thrown this together. I kind of approached it like a timed write, where I was not lovingly crafting this. I was trying to write it because I have other things I'm going to do this evening, but I wanted to make this and put it out there for posterity, because when I did this activity, it was one of the few warm-ups I'd been doing. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. I did Queen Elizabeth's speech. And this one, oh, shocker, actually got students interested and active in the discussion. And it certainly proves how valuable a discussion of rhetoric and an understanding of rhetoric is in the ultimate point of this class, which is getting what you want. Now we're analyzing Carlos's rhetoric, and you assume that he succeeds. And again, like I said, I think he left a lot of money on the table, so to speak. If he was much clearer about just what classes he was struggling in, the workload he had, what high school he attended, what grade he was in, if he had surveyed his own peers, just even informally, and was able to provide that evidence, that would have strengthened his argument. He really kind of dashed this off in a fit of passion, I imagine, and put it online. And even then, it gets 15,000 signatures because people are indeed very fed up with this. And I'm certainly in support of students voicing their opinions on this, and I'm not trying to discredit anything he's saying. But if I were grading the quality of his argument, I would tell him that he should be much more specific in providing evidence to support his own claims in order to strengthen that. So, but what do I know? I haven't made a petition that's gotten 15,000 signatures. He's got the authority over me now, right? Right. So anyway, that's it. Talk to you next time.